agree.
Super, thank you.
Great. All right, we're going to call our special meeting to order. Joan, roll call, please.
Director Hockert? Here. Director Kelsenberg?
Here.
Director Lauer?
Here.
Director Petrie?
Here.
Director Porbeni? Director Thielander?
Here.
Chair Sherman?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'm going to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Can I get a second?
Second.
Oh, great. We'll go with Katie, Director Hocker. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Tonight we're here for this special meeting. I guess I'll first turn it over to Superintendent Funk to introduce our guest speaker, Peter Levin.
Peter, do you need much of an introduction for the district here?
Yes, it's only been 30 years, but absolutely, yeah, no.
So we've got Peter Leatherman's here from Morris Leatherman to give us the results of a phone survey that was conducted over the past few weeks as we prepare for a potential referendum this fall.
Do you want to just really quickly before we move on, explain why we added the special meeting? Just, I know we've said it
Yes,
before here,
sure.
but just again.
So, lots of stuff happened this past session at the state legislature. And a lot of new bills, a lot of new laws came out of the legislature. One of the new changes that came out of it required school districts to submit documentation to the Department of Education about 45 days further than they currently have to. So we were originally looking at a timeline to have a discussion on a potential referendum later this summer in August. But due to the new requirements from the Department of Education, they have to do what they call a review and comment of any proposed projects we're doing. And so we have to get review and comments submitted earlier to give them enough time to do it. So that's kind of pushing things back a bit. So that's why we're here tonight. And originally this was going to be a presentation that was going to happen next week. But because of the timeline, we're going to ask you to approve either a resolution or some sort of review and comment next Tuesday night for the election. So that's kind of that's why
Yeah.
it's here tonight.
Thank you. I think that's just helpful to keep in mind. And now we can turn it over to you, Peter.
Super, thank you. Just pop up, there we go. Okay. I can advance, super. Thank you. All right. To review the methodology, we spoke with 625 randomly selected residents across the district. This is hot off the presses, May 31st to June 12th, so it was just completed last week. This was a much shorter survey than we did earlier this year. Very concise here in the question. And so the average interview time was 5 minutes. Non-response rate was 5.5%. The 625 sample is projectable to plus or minus 4% in 95 out of 100 cases. If we look at the demographics, no major shifts from the one earlier this year, but just to review with everybody the profile of the sample. 14% have been in the district for 5 years or less, while you have 39% that have been in the district for over 20 years. Median on this one comes in roughly about 16 and a half years a typical resident has lived in the district. 16% have a preschool child or an infant, 32% have a child attending the Stillwater School District, and then 61% are empty nesters. And just to remind everybody, an empty nester does not imply age. It's lack of presence of a child. So we could have a 28-year-old in here without a child. They're an empty nester. So as we go through the results, 6 out of 10 are not constituents and don't have children in the Stillwater School District. 19% are between 18 and 34 years old, while 35% are over the age of 55. Median on this one comes in at about 47 years old, a typical resident.
So Can
Yep.
I just ask a question?
Absolutely, yep.
So does this mirror the demographics in our school district?
Yeah, in looking at updated census, on those key components of households with children, renters that we'll see in a minute, households with seniors, those sorts of things, I'm very comfortable that we're within that margin of error, plus or minus 4%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. 15% indicated that they were renters, 33% are in homes under 300,000, 27% between 300 and 400, and then 24% over 400,000. One area that's been pretty consistent, two macro issues facing school districts this year is the financial situation, the macro financial security of the household. This question asks folks about their income and their expenses, not what they are, but how they're matching up. You have 41% that are indicating they're financially stressed. That's the lowest we have in 2023. The norm right now on that is 55%, indicating they're financially stressed. So the financial insecurity is not seen here as we see everywhere across the state. Now that 41% though is higher than it has been pre-pandemic. The norm was 28%. So we still have the increase. You just don't have the spike that we've seen. To give you an idea, back in 2008, 2009 with the recession, that was the high that we had, and that's at 65%. We're approaching that across the state. But in this district, while it's higher than pre-pandemic, it's not at the level we're seeing elsewhere. Women outnumbered men by 2%, and then the location, 33% were in the city of Stillwater, 15% each in Lake Elmo and Woodbury, and then 37% in the rest of the district. And those numbers, we set the quotas based on registered voter counts. So we know the number of registered voters, so we want to make sure that that reflects the population as a whole. We retested just a few perceptions, especially in light of the fact that the legislature has finished all their magic, and just to see if there was any change in people's attitudes and opinions at a macro level. So does the district spend taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently? Unchanged from earlier this year, 71%. It's 14 points higher than the norm of 57%. Let's go down to the bottom two. We did not test these earlier this year, but we just wanted to check in on communication because that's a critical piece of this entire process in the facilities planning. 78% indicated the district does a good job communicating. Norm on that's about 70%. So you're almost 10 points higher. Are they satisfied with the decision-making of the district? Now, this question has, I guarantee you, has yo-yoed all over the place over the course of the pandemic. You've had multiple points of difficult decisions. Where you've landed is 73% are satisfied, only 22% are dissatisfied. So it's about a 3.5 to 1 ratio. Norm on this right now is about 3 to 1. So folks are satisfied with the decision-making. Let's go up to the second, the third and fourth lines, though. That's the question. The schools are a good investment, and I would support a property tax increase to protect that investment. We wanted to see if that shifted, that core opposition in concept, who disagreed, because we don't tell them a bond referendum, an operating levy, $50 a month, $50 a year. We're just finding out how many people in concept oppose. You're still at 28%. You're under 30%. What we're actually finding for a norm right now in the metro area in 2023 is about 33% in that core opposition group. So you're below that level that we see elsewhere. It's kind of sticky. All right. I'll hold it out here just so, all right. Property tax comparisons. As I mentioned when I was here earlier this year, this is the other macro issue that we're seeing. And I mentioned November 15th, somebody flipped on a light switch. Everybody got their property tax statements and were very surprised by the increases in taxes. They knew the appraisal went up earlier the year, but they were just happy about that. They didn't think about the consequence that it was going to cause an increase in taxes. It's gone down a little bit. It's not statistically significant. As a whole, the total taxes, this time 50% said they're high, 44% average. Still had 1% say they were low and 6% were unsure. So you are at a hostile property tax climate. You're not at the level, the high I have right now in 2023 is a suburban city had 77% in the very high and somewhat high category. Where we're at for a norm right now is 57%, so a little bit below. You still have that environment. Now, it still remains the case, though, that they're not blaming the school district. If we look at their perceptions of school taxes, it goes from 50% high for total to 43% high for school taxes. So their animus then is focused at the city or county, what have you. Back in the good old days, they used to ask them, who do you blame? And then cities and counties got mad, so we don't ask that anymore. We just ask your perception of total in school taxes, so we know it's not focused at the district. That's the good news. Once again, the bad news is you're really the only show in town that people get to vote yes or no on a property tax increase. Is the district adequately funded? All right, we're starting to see now the impact of the legislative session. The communication coming out, I think, has been muted somewhat by the governor's office and the legislators in talking about the funding. But we see now it is a statistically significant increase. We now have 55% indicating that yes, the schools are adequately funded. 37% say no. This is more important if you're talking about an operating levy, but it's important to note in communications, even though this is a bond referendum, keep in mind that only 1 in 5 people know that there's a difference between a bond referendum and an operating levy. They hear districts are getting money and they'll say, build a school with it. You have to communicate, just put it out there. The money comes, operations, this is for bond, this is for building, and that money does not apply. You just need to, and people will forget that and everything, but it's important to put that out there for perceptions. Where's their predisposition at the outset if they heard the district was going to ask for a property tax increase? You're dead even. You have 25% that are against all and 25% that are for all. That's a great position to be in. What we're finding right now, the norm is a -5. So most districts have 5% more total opposition than total support. You're just at a net 0. But what it will come down to, obviously, is that 50% persuadable. All right, let's make a deal question. What's their tax tolerance for facilities needs? 28% say nothing. That's below the 35% threshold that we're looking at. So once again, it's telling us people are willing to have a conversation. 17% indicate $5 a month, 22% $10 a month, and then we have 25% at $15 or more. Median on this comes in roughly about $13, $14 a month. That's where the comfort level is. And that number, it's not set in stone. It's meant to establish guardrails because it's important on what the money's going to be used for when we test it. And so we look at 4 options and we say, would you support a property tax increase for each of these options? Safety and security, not surprisingly, leads the list. It leads the list no matter where I'm at. And it's not to say that there's any deficiency in safety and security in the district. It is an insatiable demand from the public right now. Since, basically Newtown, Connecticut, up to all the horrific things that we've seen, you can never be too safe. The other 3 have reached 60% support. Space at Oakland Middle School, replacing Lake Elmo Elementary School, and replacing Anderson Elementary School. 63, 61, 61. So you don't have none of these are red flags, shall we say. You don't have anything that has 60, 65% opposition. You have support for all 4. If we look then and asks about the sticker shock. 175 million, does it seem like a fair price? Now, this number, we just do this because this is an ethereal number. Sometimes boards get very concerned that the number is so high. It doesn't matter if I'm presenting. I presented in Buffalo earlier this week, and we tested 41 million. Worked with Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, and tested 495 million, okay? What's meant to, people hear the components and doesn't sound reasonable. Typically, about 50% say yes. You actually have 57% indicating yes for what we're talking about in building 2 elementary schools, safety and security, and expanding the middle schools. It seems like a reasonable price. So we put it together then because what matters to folks is how much it costs them at the end of the day. 175 million doesn't mean much except a total price. What does it cost them? And we told them that on a $500,000 home, the property tax increase would be about $17 a month. So it's a little bit, we're about $4 higher than the comfort level they're at, but you can see the support. You have 60% support for all 4 components. So we actually have 59% support to 38% opposition with 3% unsure. There's not a lot of intensity. Only 19% feel strongly one way or the other, and those folks wash out. 10% strong support, 9% strongly oppose. What's the reason for the decision on the bond? At this point in time, it's not surprising, but they're the softer reasons. Education's important. Children in the school district. 8% said the cost is reasonable. Only 6% talked about need. 4% said needed, and 2% said need the safety and security. Any discussion and communication, especially in an off-year election where you're going to drive turnout, it's going to be the issue that people come to vote at. People vote because things are needed. Okay, nobody wakes up on election day and says, boy, the cost is reasonable, I have to go vote. Okay, they have to understand that there's a logical consequence. Now, where are folks at on opposition? You have, every district has between 8 and 12%. You have 10% that say poor spending. And that could be spending decisions you made last week or spending decisions you made in the 1980s. Okay, it's just a consistent, they're not going to support anything. You have 10% saying the taxes are too high, 9% the cost too high, no children, need more information. Only 1% say it's not needed at this point. Now, we did test 4 other options and asked, do you support a property tax increase for each of them? You have support. It's softer than the support for the previous 4 in the larger package. The Early Childhood Family Center, 63% support, 58% space at Afton Lake Elementary School, 57% the new high school auditorium, and 56% the baseball and softball complex. In concept, that's where the support level's at. We told them that for these 4 items, it's $80 million of additional cost, and 56% said that sounded as a fair price. That was reasonable. But knowing then, with the bond referendum, what it would cost them on a $500,000 home, it adds $8 a month. This was in addition to where we were at earlier when we told them it was $17 a month. So now the whole package is at $25 a month. We still have 58% support. It pretty much mirrors the support for the overall, the $175 million package. The reason on this one, once again, it's the 3 reasons that we saw. It's the education's important, children, cost is reasonable. Only 3% said it was needed. On the flip side, it's poor spending, taxes too high, cost too high, no children, need more information, and it's not needed. So they've heard now both packages, and if we look at what their behavior will be in November amongst likely voters, it goes to 59% support the $175 million bond referendum, 37% oppose. The $80 million bond referendum is closer at 54-42. Now, a note on this. This is a pristine environment right now. You have not had a campaign. You haven't had a vote yes, you haven't had a vote no. anything like that. Typically, in about 8 out of 10 clients, this is the high water mark, okay? There's typical regression from this number through the course of a campaign. The typical regression is 6 to 8%, which the $175 million bond referendum then puts it at about 52, 53%. The $80 million bond referendum, it puts it at a coin flip. It's actually under the 50% threshold. Now, there are the exceptions to the rule. 1 out of 10 will actually hold the margins of the surveys from earlier in the year, and about 1 out of 10 will have an incredible vote yes and an incredible turnout, and they'll actually exceed that number. But the typical is the regression. So I think the data would suggest at this point in time, the safest path is to do option A, the $175 million as a standalone question. There's really not a lot of flexibility in there. You have support for all components. So to sit and try to cut costs to get down to the $13 mark, what have you, probably is not going to help a lot because it might undermine the total construction project of all 4 items. The $80 million bond referendum, I would suggest, probably should be tabled for future consideration at this point. It just might be too much, especially with the macroeconomic issues folks have and the property tax concerns that they have also. I think that's the last one. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anyone else start with questions? Go ahead, Director Petrie.
So it's interesting that early on when you talk about, their tolerance for taxes, you get a much lower result than you do later on when you ask about these 2 specific questions. I mean, can you explain that?
Which is?
So like when you're at the very beginning, when it seemed as though, how much would you be willing to pay on a monthly basis? It seemed as though it was like
13,
5 or 10 or something, 10, whatever it was. But then later on, we'll go for 25. I mean,
Yeah.
it just seems.
But that's the power of what's being included in the package. That's why there is elasticity, but there also can be retraction from that. I mean, I've seen districts actually come in. Elk River years ago had support for a referendum package as a whole. I think it was $8 a month. It wasn't that much. And they actually, the tolerance was $10. They came in at $8. It included a second sheet of ice. It failed because it was 70% people opposed. It didn't matter that it came under, it matters what's included. The counterexample to that I always use is Richfield in 2017. The survey showed at this point in time they had support for about $10 a month. But when we looked at the components, they had a series, where you had 4 components, they had 12. They had 70% support or higher. They actually had up to 85% support in concept for a property tax increase. And so when they heard what the cost was, they still supported it. They ended up going for $27 a month on the average house, and it passed $65.35. So that's why there is potential elasticity with the components. And so that's why you have that bump, at $13 a month on the average house is the tolerance. We're testing a total of 25. It still has support, not at the levels including the $80 million bond referendum, but you don't have any of those red flags. You had majority supports for all the uses, and that's what will drive up people's tolerance on a tax increase.
Mm-hmm. Because the 175 is more at about 17.
About $17 a month.
17 a
Yep,
month.
yep.
Okay, which is a little bit more than the tax tolerance that you found here?
Yep.
Okay.
But you can see then we still have the 59% saying yes because they support the 4 items.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I think in part, and this is just my opinion, but you've been here a few times predating our time on the board, but we've laid as a district the foundation for the growth that is coming, and people see the housing, and it's a story that's been, I think, told and
Right.
experienced now.
Right, and it needs to be, with any district this large, You know, whether it's Anoka, Hennepin, Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan had to do it and everything, you have to tell the whole picture. Because you'll have the potential of people saying, well, they're just getting a school and we're just getting a school, but how does this work all together? And tell that holistically. It's not like the Richfield School District that's basically the boundaries of the city. You have distinct communities here, and so it's important to show a holistic look at the needs that this package is solving for the district.
Any questions? Yes, Dr. Hager.
I have a question. To me, it seems like the first question seems like a pretty straightforward. We have these very specific needs. We have the tax tolerance, hopefully within the community to support it. The second package, the $80 million package, I just have some questions about that. I know it's not particularly recommended at this point, but there were 4 of the topics that were surveyed. I'm curious, like, where did these 4 come from? I know from experience, the early childhood center is one that I hear all the time, but like the high school auditorium and the softball complex, those are just newer things that maybe we haven't heard quite as often. So I guess I'm wondering how did those get teased out as items to really focus on for that second question, and then kind of tagged on with that, are we prepared if we would go forward and that would pass, are we prepared to flush out and like do these projects? Are they far enough along in the planning process to get to that point if we would go forward with them?
I think regarding the Early Childhood Center, that is a need that I have heard since I've been here in the past year. So that was added. One of the common themes, and that was both the Early Childhood Center and the auditorium were surveyed last time around as well as the Afton Lakeland gymnasium and additional classroom space. Again, that has we have a couple buildings with very small gymnasiums. That's one of them. The baseball softball complex was added this spring. There was a community group that has come out and said they're trying to raise money for this, and I don't think they're going to be able to do it. So they came to us and said, well, could you check to see what the threshold would be for support of something like that? So that was just okay, there's support in the community for this. So that is really helping us as an administration plan for future needs. And I think if I were to say anything on those 4 questions, if we're looking at a 10-year long-term facilities plan, I think the first 4, I think, are immediate needs that we need to address with the growth we have coming. The second 4 are things that we can address in certain ways. Like I think we have some opportunities with the early childhood short term. If we're going to be opening new schools, we're going to have 2 schools that are 100 years old that we haven't completely fleshed out plans for yet, that we could have a short-term solution. It's one of them for some early childhood programming. So I think that what I would like to say particularly about the early childhood piece in the south part of the district is let's get some programming going, let's survey some folks, what specific needs do we have, and then we can start to look at what spaces do we have to host it, and then as we look at a longer 10-year plan, okay, we can host it here, wherever that may be, Lake Elmo Elementary, the current Lake Elementary or whatever. But as we grow the program, we can take a look down the road and say, okay, this is something that maybe we can go to the voters for if something else comes off the levy in the future. High school auditorium, again, I think our high school auditorium is tiny. I don't think we've fleshed that out enough as a district to say, okay, here's what the need is, here's what we really, really want. I think it was on the survey to see what kind of support does this have. That's an expensive, we're talking probably $40 million for a high school auditorium. And you're hearing the want versus need discussion with our tax threshold. So, but again, that gives us as an administration something that we can take a look at long-term planning wise. how do we address that in the future? I've done likewise that time. So that's, nobody's asked the question, but I'll just state this, that we had a facilities team get together that looked at the CDT results back from 2019, and they came and presented to the board again last month. Their recommendation was, and his results tonight that he's sharing with us are the results of the survey, mirror those of the facilities team. So, in my opinion, the cleanest thing for the district would be to go out for question one and let's get it done. People have been talking to me before I even started about needing a new school or new schools, and okay, let's do it. And let's focus people on our need. And we as an administrative team could look at the wants, incrementally over the next few years. So, my 2 cents on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So we have one, the needs, the two, the wants. Does the presence of a second question affect the first question? You know what I'm saying?
It can. It depends what's in the second question. It signals to the community, a lot of people think, when you do multiple questions, that it's a sacrificial lamb. That you're putting a second question out there to give the community to vote something no on. Now, I would say historically that's the case. In recent years, we see, there have been multiple districts that have gone on a bond referendum for 2 questions and kind of separate out the needs versus the wants. The interesting thing about the wants, typically, in those districts, it was based around a lot of athletics. And athletic parents are insatiable. And if they know that the passage of question 2 is contingent on passage 1, they will try to lift the boat on both of those. And it has been successful in the last few years. Because it's such the constituency feels so strongly, they'll work so hard. In looking at this one, though, I like hockey, but hockey parents will set their hair on fire in order to get an ice rink. Similarly, pool people will also. Those are 2 major, and so they work hard. I think when I look at this, historically, can I think of any districts that, your constituencies on these would be early childhood. I don't know if that group is large enough in order to, and then performing arts and auditorium. They're not like athletic people in the sense. No. And so I just think it's an important consideration to think. And I think also, as the superintendent mentioned, and in looking at this, when you have an environment at a macro level of the economic situation of folks and the property tax, we're not at the point we were in 2008, 2009, 2010, where districts really only passed have-to-haves. There were districts, they couldn't even build new buildings. They would get deferred maintenance, okay? We're not at that point, but I think a recognition and kind of ferreting out what are the needs, the academic needs versus the nice-to-haves or the wants is an important distinction to think about in the macro climate. Because once again, I tell everybody, this is a snapshot in time. And so if the economy does, if inflation's been coming down, all of a sudden it pops up September, October, November, stock market dives 6,000 points. Those sorts of things have impacted referendums in the past also. And so it's a cognizant that we're not, it's kind of unsettled ground. But for the most part, second questions are not the historic sacrificial lamb that they have been in the past.
Director Stillwater?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Obviously, there's a lot of science that goes into this whole process. If we could just back up a little bit and just looking at, a brush fire coal, If you can just elaborate just kind of why is that used versus other polls? You know, what are the limitations? You know, maybe some of the response biases that may be a part of that, of any poll. And just, you know, kind of the, you know, the methodological considerations around, you know, the geographic distribution. And, you know, obviously, it's important to understand, you know, there's a science to it. And so there's, you know, having a 95% confidence level with a plus or minus 4%, that's really good. You know, but, you know, just to make sure people understand that this is not a full district-wide polling of every single person, but it's a representation and it's scalable based on the science around how this is done. So if you can maybe elaborate on that and provide some greater context.
Sure, yeah, I could talk at a macro level on the methodology. I mean, there's three primary, when you see surveys, there are three primary ways people collect data for surveys: telephone, computer, internet, and the mail. Truly, the only way to have, you know, organizations will dispute this. And they actually, if you look at the fine print, those that do internet surveys and mail-out surveys, they don't call it a margin of error. They call it a confidence interval, which, as my business partner, who's a doctorate, who taught statistics, has no idea what a confidence interval is. Because mail-out and internet surveys, they serve a purpose, okay? But at the end of the day, there's two biases. There's bias up front in that if an internet survey, even in the metro area, 5 to 10% of people don't have access to the internet, okay? There's demographics to that. It's based low income, but also age. On the flip side, I always make the joke, but it's absolutely accurate. My 22-year-old has no idea where the mailbox is, much less is he going to go take a survey out of the mailbox, fill it out, put a stamp on it, and mail it back. So the 18 to 34-year-olds are not going to respond to a survey. Beyond that, then, once the survey is administered, you have self-selection. Okay, if you feel strongly about this, you are going to return the survey. The return rate typically is somewhere between 15 and 25%. And so what does that say? The example, my business partner and now Dr. Lifto, who works with us, they wrote an article in the National Journal for Superintendents last year with a case study of a mail-out survey that was done in North Dakota, where the survey showed that the bond referendum would pass 65-35. People, the board went ahead and did it, not realizing, I mean, they knew it, but they didn't think about it. The demographics showed that 74% of the sample were parents, okay? The actual representation of parents in the district was actually 25%. So parents won the survey, got the bond referendum out there, and it failed 2-1 against. Because you don't, there's no reweighting or anything. You have people with agendas. On the flip side, you can have people go out and try to lose surveys when you can manipulate. You know, I've seen everything from people filling out surveys from in other cities for a community in that sense, because you really can't control that. So at the end of the day, we still do telephone surveys. We've used cell phones. Cell phones have been part of the mix in our sampling since 2007. So, I mean, it's just been part of the mix. We see a consistent growth now. You know, majority in the metro area are cell phone only. Typically in the metro area, we still have about 10%, they exist, that are landline only. They have not gotten cell phones, and then the rest are a combination. And so with that, and then the methodology, by being in the field, not just calling in 2 nights and taking which is what the Star Tribune does in their poll, and then they reweight it. And so we don't reweight. I set quotas. If I look at the registered voter count, city of Stillwater should be somewhere around a third. And we establish what the quotas are, and we're doing that as we're going through, because I don't want to bias the sample against those with an active lifestyle, especially parents. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, I
So-
just appreciate the background on the process, and
Excellent.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Along those same lines, but as it relates specifically to that last slide, question 1 versus question 2, put a label on them, were they asked in this, as one being contingent on the other, or were they asked independent of each other?
They're asked independent of each other.
Okay.
So not as a whole package. And that last slide is likely voters. One note on that. You have, there are some things people don't want to tell pollsters what their true intentions are. Do they recycle? Everybody recycles. Are you going to vote? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you did have about 55% fall in the category of a likely voter at this point in time. That's way too high. It'll probably will be, my guess is, somewhere in the 20 to 30% range. It's kind of interesting. You know, turnout can definitely impact referendums one way or the other, especially in an off-year election. And we just saw Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan with $495 million bond referendum, the largest in the history of the state. Turnout was 10%. And so I don't know what that says on citizenship, shall we say. Because that is, I mean, even the superintendent, I talked to them, they want to do a survey to understand why nobody showed up, even though they won. I mean, they understand the concern on that. If you're not engaged, they're not saying, oh, great, we won. It's only 10% of people actually came out. And so that's something that's in the mix also. But yes, they were asked separately, not as a whole $250 million package.
Questions? Great. Well, I know we probably want to have a discussion, but I don't think we need you for that.
All right. I could be home by 8 then, perfect.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Your work is always excellent.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And once again, I apologize. I hate being late, so,
Don't
all
worry
right.
about it.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Great. So I just want to open it up to some discussion, given that information, and past discussions. I know that none of this is new. We've been discussing this now for months. And just kind of get a sense where people are. I know we're taking a vote on Tuesday. Timelines have been moved up, as superintendent said, just due to legislative changes to dates. So I guess I'll open the floor for people's opinions or thoughts.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
All right, so what we're looking at in the question one here, all right, we are looking at replacing Anderson Elementary and replacing Lake Elmo Elementary. We do not have locations identified publicly yet. Okay, so when you make the resolution, if that's what you choose to do, all right, that's what the resolution will authorize, that we will raise money through a bond to build these new schools to replace. It doesn't have locations identified within the ballot language. So I think that's important for people to know, because, you know, I was in Bayport last night at a meeting, and, you know, to talk about Barker's Elks. And, you know, there's other options that, that we're looking at. In that area, there's other options that we're looking at in Lake Elmo as well. So we are not tying this to a specific, okay, you're buying this piece of property and you're doing this. Okay, so I think that's important to know.
I can speak for myself. I think when I ran for school board, you know, we kind of were faced with what was a relatively tumultuous time for the district. I mean, it was just kind of a, it was just something that I think that the community, there were some trust issues. And so for me, I look at question one as something that we have solidly laid the foundation for a long time. The housing is there. I mean, it's no longer at all a want. It's a need, or we're not going to have, we need the space where the kids and the housing is coming. So for me, this is about trust and respecting our taxpayer tolerance. I know that the economy isn't great for many people, even though I know the survey is showing a little bit more optimistic picture, relatively speaking, compared to other districts. I just think for me personally, it's important to listen to the survey and to respect the tolerance of taxpayers. So I'm more in favor of, you know, question one. I'm a little uncomfortable with question two.
Just a comment on the tax piece. What I'm working on is getting you a tax table for next Tuesday night, because we're talking $17 a month right now for the 175 million on a $500,000 home. Okay, what I'm working on getting the board is what the tax impact will be on somebody who has a $300,000 home, $200,000 home, so that not everybody who we are going to be, not everybody has a $500,000 home. It may be the most common median price home in the district, but the tax impact is going to be different based upon the value of your home. So I think it's important information for the board to have going into this.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, that's kind of where I'm at, and I also just really quickly, I just want to say, although we have some great ideas for what a question 2 could be, I don't feel like it's as fleshed out to the point that I'm comfortable, kind of standing behind it right now. I mean, to me, a baseball complex sounds like a great idea if that was supported by the community, but boy, I'd love to take an audit of all of our sports and athletic needs. Why just this sport? What's the reach on students? What's the impact? I think that programming in the South for ECFE is super important, but I trust that the superintendent has ways to achieve that in the short term so that we can really work on what is that programming and the facility comes after. Same thing can be said for, I would love, I'm a huge arts, my family was music, I'm a huge supporter of that, and our auditorium is terribly undersized. But I don't know, especially with our timing constraints now, I just don't know, we have enough time to really flush out with those staff members and community members what the actual needs are. But I think these secondary questions give us some good ideas for future projects, for things that can happen. So that's just where I'm at. Dr. Steelander?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you. I think that tax table would be really helpful. It's like, even goes to Kohl's, if you have a discount, they give you a breakdown for every percentage. I mean, it makes it super simple, and it's a really clear way of being transparent. So I think that's gonna be a really great tool, to make it more relatable to everybody in the district. Within like, I give a question 175, let's say, again, I'm not saying there's multiple questions, but the 175, does that include, I remember from the previous facilities designs team, they had some additional future safety type of initiatives. Is that still separate? Is that built in?
I think it's built in.
To be built, okay. Which I think it's, to me, there's no reason why not to.
Absolutely.
Additional, okay. Great.
Because safety is the thing.
It's a
It's everything.
no-brainer. Yeah, absolutely, okay.
Your, $17 on a $500,000 house, is it strictly proportional, so a 250 would be 850?
I can't say it's directly proportional.
What is it? Okay.
So I'm not going to say that tonight.
Right, we'll get there.
Tuesday.
All right.
Well, okay, so the bond, there's a number to it, right? I mean, we're not saying whatever it takes to build this school,
175.
it's gonna be 175. Those numbers, there's only 24% or more of the houses in the district are over $400,000. And I feel like the numbers that they were taking, that when, at least when I'm working on memory here, when the design team was saying that they were, looking at how much money would be generated based off of an average of $500,000 homes.
I think it was median, yeah. Median price, yeah.
So does that mean, feels like maybe the impact is higher than just $17?
I think actually, the impact for some folks, 24% is going to be higher, but I think the impact for a lot of folks is going to be lower.
And the one thing too, I always go back to, and I don't know if, I'm sure this can't be factored into anything because you have to communicate the worst case, but it seems like as our tax base grows, I mean, when we approved the operating levy as a board, and we communicated the same graph with all the, with everything in there, it was actually less, unless your property value increased.
We are seeing in the initial estimates, because of the growth. When we started to look at this back in earlier this late winter, we are seeing an increased tax base that is lowering taxes across the district because of the continued growth in the southern part of the district. So in the short term, I still, in the short term, I mean next couple of years, I still think you are going to see benefits of our expanded tax base. Because the more properties that come on the books, the more we're able to spread the taxes, which will reduce the impact on our taxpayers in the district. So I think that's a real positive for us. But I don't know what that number looks like at this point.
Yes, Director Petrie.
And thank you for clarifying that, because that was the question that I was gonna ask. I mean, the more people who move into primarily the south part of our district, the more taxpayers we have that spread that tax. And so it lowers it for pretty much everybody. But the flip side of that, of course, is that they are moving into our district with children that need to be educated. And that is why question 1 is so essential. I mean, I say this in jest, but it's, I mean, if we don't do this, we're gonna be educating kids in tents in another, 5 or 7 years. I mean, we just simply don't have the capacity to be able to educate kids in the south part of the district. And anybody who drives down there is shocked anew every time they do, because there's a whole nother development down there. And we have to educate those students. And so to me, I mean, I go back to what you said, Chair Sherman, I believe that wholeheartedly. Question number 1 is absolutely essential for this district. I have a harder time with question 2 because, the district just hasn't had time to flesh out those, those are, most of them are deficits that the community design team did explore, but, we have a new superintendent who has a new team, and he has spent his time in the last year identifying how to meet the needs of those students and those students that are coming in the south part of the district. He hasn't really had time to flesh out any of these other things that have been identified by the community design team. And so I would not be comfortable recommending to the community that they say yes to a question 2, because I don't feel as though any of us have been able to vet those perceived needs yet. But communication and surveys of this sort, I think are critical, because, even if they don't lead us in a particular direction right now, they tell us, they give us an idea, a glimmer of what the community feels about some other potential needs in the future. And so information is good, but that doesn't necessarily, in my mind, transfer to recommending a question 2.
Yes, Dr. Hocker.
Jump in. So to be perfectly honest, I'm a little disappointed that question 2 looks like it's got less and less support, especially after the survey tonight. I will be honest, I was very hopeful that we would be able to go to our community and ask for not only what we absolutely need, but looking forward into the future and looking at some of the things that we do want and we have been wanting for a while, particularly the auditorium. I do know that has been discussed. But for me, the ECFE Family Center, I was really surprised at how well that surveyed, and then just anecdotally kind of hearing from families, and with all that growth that Dr. Petrie was just mentioning about in the South, the biggest frustration of new parents is getting into our programs for our preschool, and that is historically been a good way to get kids into the district, and once they're in a preschool, they stick with us. So that really becomes kind of a good business move, as you could say, in capturing those kids early on. So I was really hopeful that we would have a place to put and give these families an opportunity to join our district right from the very beginning. I'm also frustrated because of the timeline. I do recognize the hesitation in not having these plans fully fleshed out at this point, and we need to make a decision next week. So I don't want to put something half-baked in front of voters. That to me is just irresponsible. So I do recognize that question 1 we've laid the foundation, we've had the conversations. So for me, I'm totally on board with that one. The need is there. I'm a little sad that it doesn't look like question 2 is ready quite yet, but I just hope that staff and everybody hears the urgency of especially the Early Family Childhood Center, and will make accommodations as quickly as possible to get as many families into the district, and then hopefully in the future make that a priority.
Superintendent?
So just a couple thoughts on that. If, people talk about a teacher shortage in our society right now. The biggest shortage we have in Stillwater area public schools are staff for our early childhood program. I mean, I think when I came in to the district, we had a waiting list of 400 to 500 kids. Okay? So until we can get this shift figured out as far as staffing to meet current need, I think we got to get that right. And then I think, as I stated, I think we need to take a look at, okay, how can we A, staff it, and B, I think we've got some short-term potential solutions for some sort of center in the southern part of the district, particularly when we start building. I really want to emphasize that is a need, but we're not, administratively, we haven't been able to figure it out as far as the staffing side of it yet, but I'm confident we're going to get there. The other concern I've got with all the question two things, I'm going to go back to what I said to the facilities team when they first met, and I said, here's my three priorities for the district. We provide the best educational environment that meets the needs of our students and staff. District-wide, we want to have an equitable experience so that they're similar. We need to prepare for future growth, and that's what I hear every person tonight talking about. And the third thing, and this I think the survey really bears this out, is we need to operate in a fiscally responsible manner, balancing student need with taxpayer support. And your $175 million question, I think, is pretty darn close to doing both of those things. So that's where I'm in support of the one question.
The one thing too, for myself, ECFE was hard for me to let go, because I too, I'm nowhere near ECFE with my family, but it was an issue back when I had children. So, but to me, I guess I look at that as, even though we're taking a facility survey here, I think that's the community telling us a programming need and something that we can offer differently. And if we grow it to the point that it necessitates a building, that to me is like the last piece. I think it's kind of what you're saying.
And there's some things we can do, opportunities I think from the legislature to get more funding for staffing that I'm familiar with from previous experiences that can help us with that. So I think that there are some opportunities potentially available for that. And I think if we build it, whether it's, the shortage of daycare or the core ECFE courses that we offer through community education, I think we can do it. But it's not been, have not spent a lot of time on it yet. And so that's the caution I've got.
Well, just addressing some of our older buildings that don't have the capacity. Question 1, as it's written, does increase our preschool ability right out the get-go, which is something that has an amazing wait list. My one question was the $175 million. It has come up in the past, and I know, we're kind of ready to go on this, but are we confident that that number is enough to accomplish everything in question 1?
Yes. I'm looking at those two after I said yes.
And I asked about the safety, and it sounds like that's included within the 175, which is highly important. One of the other sidebar items for future consideration was equitable learning environments throughout other schools in the district.
Yep.
Is that in or out? as part of
So
this?
that's part of it. One of the things Mark is going to be talking with the board on, and you're going to be approving on Tuesday night, is our 10-year long-term facilities plan. And so you're going to see within that plan, and I talk about Stonebridge quite a bit, because I've visited there, I've seen them in the process last summer. We are updating schools as part of that long-term facilities revenue, and so that is an ongoing yearly plan that goes forward, that's separate from the bond. But we have dedicated funding from the state for that.
One other question, so going back to the end of May board meeting where we had the facility design team's recommendations.
Yep.
If I recall, that amount was $195 at $20 a month at a $500,000.
That was a $20 a month. Yep.
And this is now 17 at 175.
Yep.
What, any reason for the recommendation being even reduced even farther from the facility design team's proposal?
What we did was, we took a look at the proposal that they recommended, which was those 4 items. That came in at 175. All right, the 195 number you saw was, we could pay up to this at $20 a month. All right, so if we went 195, but we could have the gymnasium, at that point would be probably $10 million, which would get you partially that high. I think an early childhood center looking at $27 million, which would put you over that number. So that was a number that our financial consultants gave us. But when we put question 1 together, we took it, okay, what's this gonna cost that these, and again, we're not cutting any corners. What's really the full question 1 that may be in at 175. So.
And I'm assuming there's allowances in that, like, because we talked a lot about, what are these, we don't know what these buildings are gonna look like, because there'll be community input in all of these, so there's contingencies.
There's
I'm assuming.
contingencies in there, because, you've all seen inflation over the past years, so that, there's a built-in number for inflation, there's a built-in number for overages, for a number of different things. So, but I'm very confident in that number. So.
Sorry, any questions, but, so yeah, I mean, looking at some of these other things, I kind of echo, Dr. Hucker, what you had mentioned, in terms of just hoping to see maybe some further support for some of these other items that I think would be beneficial. That would be part of the $80 million additional referendum. And I think, Peter Leatherman,
Yes.
who made a very good presentation, and obviously they have some impeccable work, talked about the Egan School District having the largest bond referendum in history, only 10%. I mean, to me, obviously there's some huge needs. I mean, Lake Elmo, Anderson, there's a huge need. Oakland needs love. The safety is always a no-brainer, but, as we look at some things, what is going to, get people out to vote? And I think that's a good thing. The more people and the broader representation, to me, is a good thing. I mean, obviously, it'd be great if that gets passed and we can address these needs, but I also want to make sure that we have input and representation of the community at a larger degree. So I think if some of these other types of items in that $80 million threshold, although, aren't probably a need, and that's always a matter of interpretation, but what is going to motivate and inspire people in the community that are maybe approaching school district matters in more of a peripheral awareness, just not, overly engaged, but enough to be engaged if something motivates them, and what's going to do that for them that's going to help get a better representation and address some of these areas that, maybe aren't being accounted for within the current polling, just as a result of some of the, scrunch in this process within, due to the changes in the legislation. So, I think like a high school auditorium, or other types of things, we have the best in class, music, arts, and theater program. Even, this athletics with baseball and softball, I'm assuming that would probably be a much smaller price tag, but that probably would get people out to vote, and I would love to be able to represent some of these areas like the, the music and other areas, that just simply has not been addressed in previous referendums. And I think, you mentioned that, it's tiny. I mean, I just can't go back to the fact that we have this tiny auditorium with a best-in-class program that, I think deserves more, and I think that would get people out to vote, and I think would be of interest if presented. But obviously, we need to be prudent and look at what's being the greater good. But I just don't want it to be short-sighted either, and essentially, I don't want to be a penny wise and a pound foolish. Because long-term, there's going to be an opportunity cost to our students, to our communities, are not addressing some of these things sooner versus, I think last meeting, it may not be another referendum for 10 years from now. That's an opportunity cost that I think we have to be mindful of and understand what does that impact our students' experience of what we're trying to do as a board. So, just my 2 cents.
Based upon my experience, I'm gonna go back to the core need versus want, okay? So I think, even looking at the survey numbers he showed us, in the negatives, there was 1 or 2% said not needed. Okay, so I truly believe that people understand the need for the core question one. With the question two, with the auditorium and with, let's take the baseball field, for example, those are going to be lightning rod questions. And they are going to draw out, this is something, a luxury I don't need to pay for, or really we're spending all this money on a baseball field or a softball field. So as many people as you have coming out in support of that, you are going to hear, might not be as many coming against it, but you are going to hear loud opposition against, we don't need to do that. And so my advice to you as a board is, in our environment where Mr. Leatherman said we are in a tax hostile environment, we have a need that we all understand. I think the prudent thing to do at this point in time, even though I get it, your auditorium here that we have at Stillwater Area High School is half the size, or not quite half the size, but smaller than the district I came from, which is considerably smaller than that. So I understand that, but I'm also just give you a pragmatic recommendation that these things are important, and it's up to the administration to figure out how we can work a plan together to get them done. But I think short-term wise, question one is the way to go.
Dr. Petrie?
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I just kind of wanted to piggyback on that a little bit, because I feel as though in this community in particular, we need to lay the groundwork with our voters here, which we have been doing for the last few years, and calling their attention to the fact that we have had all this growth in the south part of the district, and we have to have a plan to be able to educate all the new students who are coming into our district. We've been talking about that for years, and I do feel as though what we saw in the survey results indicate that our community has listened and they understand what the need is. And so I would like to see us do something similar with some of these other identified opportunities, like an auditorium. But I do think that at this point in time, it's not been introduced or explored with the community, and I feel as though that is something that we have to do before we put something on the ballot like that. We have to bring our community along with us. They have to understand what this need is, and they have to understand the why. And if we only have a few months between now and, an election in November, I don't feel as though that's enough time to explore and, explore that concept and get it across to our community. I think we need to lay the groundwork. And I do think our community will step up in the future, but I think it has to be a more deliberate approach.
Well, and I think with that in mind, you said that the district, the residents understand the need for it based on the survey results. They don't. You know, the reason for the bond decision that it's needed, 4%. They don't even know that they need it. They just think that it's good, that students need, deserve a good education. That's the big push. A little bit of work behind what's needed, with the early childhood need and the auditorium. If we, actually tried to lay the groundwork for that, I think it'd probably be easy to find support for it. But so much of this is based on just an abstract notion that, school's good. And they're not wrong, but when there are actual needs, like a new school needs to be built in Lake Elmo, or an obvious growth in population. If the need isn't seen there, well then, that's partially a communication issue. Even though they say we do a good job communicating. So, and I also agree, question one is the way to go, and I just don't want to cloud the matter with question two. It isn't a question of whether or not we should do it. We should, for all the reasons stated. But I don't want to cloud the issue. I mean, I want one to pass with flying colors.
And question one is critical to the kids. I mean, you have to have space to put the growth that's occurring. Or questions for the superintendent? So just to reiterate, on Tuesday, you'll be asking for us to pass a resolution for the review and comment. And it sounds like there's a lot of support around question one. And that, question two, although there's a lot of nice things, that we need some further exploration and time to lay the groundwork. And I would even say on the auditorium, I mean, perhaps there are staff members who would want to be involved from our theater and music programs, and maybe the needs are different than we all notice in auditorium because it's so obvious, but there might be other needs that programs have that we just don't know because of timing. And great. Well, thank you very much. And just for the community to know, our next meeting on Tuesday is at Brookview Elementary. We're kind of doing this road show as we have our Oak Park facility under construction for the Alternative Learning Center. So Brookview, 6 p.m. Tuesday. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
Stay cool. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.